Malcolm had suggested the bar like it was nothing. "Let's get a drink, just the two of us," he said that morning, all smiles and charm. I hadn't seen him like that in years. Not since before the move, before Brooke started calling the shots. So when he opened the passenger door for me and said I looked nice, I wanted to believe it meant something. The bar was dim, upscale, too quiet for a weeknight. He ordered me a glass of red Cabernet, my favorite, and made small talk, like we were strangers trying to get along. He asked about my garden, said he missed my roast chicken, and even mentioned bringing me to meet some people soon, whatever that meant. Then his phone buzzed. "Just a sec," he said, already standing. "I gotta take this outside." He left his drink untouched. Mine was half gone. I watched the door slowly shut behind him. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I started twisting the napkin in my lap. That's when the bartender walked over. He didn't speak at first, just placed a clean glass beside me and wiped the bar. Then his hand rested lightly on my wrist. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't think you should drink that." I blinked at him. He glanced toward the front door. "Your son, he's out back. With someone. They're passing papers. Looks legal, seemed off." My heart thudded hard against my ribs. I stood up too fast, muttered something about the restroom, and made my way to the back hallway. The window was small but open. I climbed through slowly, careful not to snag my coat. The alley smelled of oil and old rain. I spotted Malcolm 20 feet ahead, standing beneath a flickering light with a tall man in a black coat. Malcolm handed him an envelope, thick, beige, and deliberate. He didn't look nervous. He looked like someone sealing a deal. I pressed myself against the wall. Breath held tight, coat pulled close. When he turned and walked the other way, I stayed frozen in place, watching him disappear into the dark. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed until the sky shifted from black to gray coat. Still buttoned purse still at my feet. My hands were cold, not from the weather, but from the feeling that something inside me had cracked open and was leaking out slowly. At some point in the night, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. I'd taken it in the moment he wasn't looking, just before we left the bar. He'd set his bag on the floor to hug me. Goodbye, said something about calling me next week. I'd felt the paper sticking out of the front pocket and slipped it into mine without thinking. At the time, I wasn't even sure why. Now I knew. It was a quitclaim deed. My house. My address printed in bold just beneath the header, and right below that, a line that said, Grantor Corinne Maddox. Grantee Malcolm J. Maddox. I kept reading. There was a signature mine, a careful curved version of my name. But it wasn't mine. It mimicked my loops, even got the crooked X right. But I never held that pen. I never saw this page. I flipped to the bottom where the notary block sat in neat print. Carl Bennett. Carl. He used to live across the street. Retired early, walked his dog past my porch every morning for years. We used to trade tomatoes from our gardens, but Carl moved away 2 years ago after his wife passed. I sent a card. He wrote back from Vermont. My hands started to tremble. I folded the document in half, then into quarters, then again. I pressed it flat between my palms as if I could crush the lie out of it. But it held firm, quiet, and cruel. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a rushed form. He forged my signature. He found a way to use Carl's name, maybe even his stamp. I set the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it until the light changed. Then I walked to the cabinet, pulled out my phone, and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. When Malcolm started coming around more, I thought it was just life softening him. He'd been tense for years, distant, overworked, always with some excuse. But 3 weeks ago, he showed up on a Thursday evening with takeout and a bottle of seltzer, saying he'd just missed home. I let him in without hesitation. He asked about the gutters, said he could fix the back shelf that had been sagging. He sat at the table while I cooked one night peeling carrots like he used to when he was 12. I told myself not to overthink it. I wanted to believe he just needed time, that maybe he was finally circling back. He brought over some mail one afternoon, said he picked it up from my box while I was at the doctor, handed it to me sealed but slightly creased, like someone had peeked but tried to smooth the fold. Another time he mentioned helping me sort my bills, said I shouldn't be handling all those statements alone. I laughed and told him I was fine. He didn't press, just smiled and changed the subject. And then there was the time I caught him near the medicine drawer. He said he was looking for painkillers for a headache, but now I remember how his eyes scanned the labels, how he asked me afterward if I ever forgot doses. Jokingly, but with a pause too long to be casual. He'd even offered to find someone to stop by the house a few times a week, saying it'd ease my mind. Not his mind. I thought it was care. I called my sister after that and said he's coming back to himself. She said, "That's good." We both believed it, but sitting here now with that envelope burned into my memory, I see it for what it was. Scaffolding, quiet preparation. He wasn't reconnecting, he was casing the place, building trust just enough to take it. I stood up from the kitchen chair and pulled the curtains open. The street outside hadn't changed, but I had. My next call had to be to someone who remembered the fine print. I went back the next afternoon just before the lunch rush. I wore the same coat, left the buttons loose like I'd hurried out. I told the hostess I might have dropped a scarf and made my way toward the bar. The same bartender was there polishing glasses. He saw me, gave a nod, and quietly slid a folded napkin across the counter. I placed my hand over it like I was just resting there, then slipped it into my sleeve. Outside, I sat on the bench across the street and opened it. A name. A phone number. Below that, 5 words. She knows what he's doing. I called without hesitation. Naomi Guerra, the woman said on the second ring. I introduced myself and told her someone had said she could help. There was a pause. Then she said, "What did your son give you to sign?" I explained the envelope, the document, the forged signature. She asked for a photo. I took one and sent it immediately. She called back less than 10 minutes later. "That's a deed, Ms. Maddox," she said. "If you'd signed that, your son would have become the legal owner of your property. No court needed." Just like that. I didn't respond right away. She asked if I had a copy of the original deed or any estate documentation from my late husband. I told her I might. She said she'd worked with a Gregory Maddox once years ago, helped him restructure after a back injury. That was my husband. She remembered the house. Naomi said she'd look into it from her end, but warned me to move carefully. "He's using a real notary's stamp," she added. "That's not something you find by accident." I thanked her, and we hung up. I sat in the car for a while, watching people go in and out of the bakery next door. My hands rested in my lap still, but my thoughts moved fast. Malcolm hadn't just crossed a line, he'd planned his steps before I ever saw the edge. I drove straight home and went to the back bedroom. There was something I needed to find. I hadn't thought about the floorboards in years, but as I stood in the back bedroom, something my husband once said returned with absolute clarity. "If anything ever happens, look under the third board in our closet." He said it like a joke, but his hand had been on my shoulder when he did, and his voice had gone still. I pulled back the rugs and moved the shoe rack aside. The third board creaked differently from the others, just slightly raised at one edge. I wedged the handle of a screwdriver beneath it and lifted. There it was, a yellowed envelope, edges curled with age, bound in twine. Inside were 3 things: a thick legal document folded in half, a single-page ledger of small accounts and funds, and a business card. Julian Marks, CPA. Greg used to call Julian the only man besides me who knows where our money lives. I dialed the number on the card, half expecting it to be disconnected. It wasn't. "Julian Marks," a voice answered. I introduced myself. There was a pause, then warmth. "Corinne Maddox," he said. Greg always said you were sharper than him, but I never believed it until now. How can I help? I explained what I'd found, what had happened, what I feared. He asked me to read the trust aloud. I did line by line until he stopped me. That's it, he said. That's the original trust we set up 5 years ago. The house was placed in it to protect both of you. Legally, Malcolm can't touch it. He'd need trustee approval, and you're the only trustee listed. I thanked him, promised to call again soon, and hung up. I scanned copies of everything and sent them to Naomi. She replied an hour later. The documents were valid, legally sound. This trust is rock solid, she wrote. Do not tell him you have it. I stared at the folder for a long time. My mind should have been at ease, but it wasn't. Somehow, this felt less like the end of something and more like a countdown. I didn't rush. Every step had to be quiet, deliberate. That was something Greg taught me. If you move like you have time, people never ask what you're really doing. First, I made clean copies of the trust document and sent them to Naomi through her encrypted portal. She responded quickly with a brief message. I'll file the notice and initiate a hold on property actions today. Then I drove to the county clerk's office, walked straight to the records window, and filed an incident report. I kept it simple. Potential forged deed, submitted or in circulation, regarding my residential property. I signed it, left no room for questions, and walked out without looking back. That same evening, Naomi confirmed the property transfer had been flagged. Any attempted changes will now trigger a manual review, she said. You've bought yourself time. I didn't want time. I wanted truth. I sat down at the kitchen table, hands folded around my phone, and typed a message to Malcolm. Let's talk. Bring your lawyer if you want. He replied so fast it startled me. Perfect. I'll bring the investor too. See you Thursday. There was no hesitation in his tone, no guilt, just eagerness. It made my chest ache. He still thought I was in the dark. I stared at the screen for a while before responding. Thursday works. I didn't tell Naomi right away. I needed the silence to think. He'd walk into that meeting feeling confident, probably smug. He might have a polished pitch, a neat binder, even a handshake deal ready to go. But I'd seen what he tried to bury, and this time I wasn't walking in unarmed. I took the trust papers from the drawer and slid them into a fresh folder, labeled it House, and placed it at the top of the pile I planned to bring. He wanted a deal. I was ready for a reckoning. The office was tucked between a shuttered bakery and a strip mall with more weeds than cars. It smelled like old carpet and stale coffee. I arrived 5 minutes early. Malcolm and his guest were already there. He stood when I walked in, smiling too wide, like this was a brunch and not whatever it truly was. He wore a blazer that didn't fit quite right and introduced the woman beside him as Dana, our investment partner. She offered a handshake. Her nails were perfect. Her eyes were tired. Before I could respond, the door opened behind me. Naomi stepped in, calm as ever, a folder in one hand and nothing on her face. Let's sit, she said. Malcolm started into some kind of pitch, pulling out a packet from his briefcase, but Naomi gently raised a hand. I'll make this simple, she said, laying her folder flat. Corinne's property is part of a family trust established 5 years ago. She is not the sole owner, and legally she cannot transfer or sign over the house to anyone without violating the terms of that trust. Dana straightened in her chair, suddenly alert. Her fingers stopped tapping. Malcolm looked at me, confused. What trust, Mom? What is she talking about? Naomi didn't wait. She opened her folder and slid out a document. The same one Malcolm had tried to pass as an investment form. And this, she said, is the quitclaim deed your office submitted. Dana leaned forward to see. Her jaw tightened. Naomi tapped the notary seal. This stamp belonged to Carl Bennett, a licensed notary who passed away last spring. So, Unless your client found a way to time travel this signature and the entire document is fraudulent. Malcolm said nothing. Color drained from his face. His hand drifted to the edge of the table and stayed there unmoving. Naomi didn't speak again. She didn't need to. The silence in the room shifted, stretched, held everyone in place. I looked at my son and saw something new, not anger, not shame. Something quieter. Something broken. Dana was the first to break. She stood so quickly, her chair scraped the floor, one sharp sound that sliced the air in the room. "You told me this was clean," she said to Malcolm, low furious. "You said your mother approved." He reached for her wrist. "Dana, wait." She didn't look at him again. The door swung shut behind her, the chime above it rattling like a warning bell. Naomi exhaled unhurried and folded her hands over the open folder. For the record, she said what was attempted here qualifies as fraud elder exploitation and the use of a forged notary seal, all of which are criminal offenses. Reports have already been filed. I said nothing. There was nothing left to add. Every word Malcolm might have expected from me, anger, pleading, even tears, stayed locked behind my ribs. Malcolm swallowed hard. "Mom?" Look, it was a mistake. A bad idea. I wasn't thinking straight. His voice cracked when he said it, like the words were jagged on the way out. I thought I was doing something smart. For us. For us, I repeated quietly, tasting the lie in the air. Naomi began closing her folder, each paper sliding into place with a quiet finality. "If you'd like," she said. Without looking at him, we can discuss next steps after Ms. Maddox and I speak privately. No threats, no raised voice, no theatrics. And yet, Malcolm looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. I stood then, slowly pushing my chair back. My legs held steady, even if the rest of me felt coated in ice. "I won't press charges," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time since the meeting began. But I will never forget this. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for words that would change nothing. I walked past him, opened the door, and stepped into the thin afternoon light, each step feeling quieter than the last, but more certain. By the time the door clicked shut behind me, I already knew going back home wouldn't feel the same. The first thing I did when I got home was open every window. The breeze was cold, but it moved through the rooms like it belonged there, chasing out the stiffness that had settled in over weeks. The scent of lemon cleaner clung to the floorboards and curtains, mixing with something older disappointment, maybe. But I let it drift out with the wind. I changed the front lock that evening, not because I thought Malcolm would come back, but because I needed something new between us. A layer, a line. Then I pulled out my filing boxes and started sorting. Birth certificates, tax returns, Greg's pension records. I made a new folder marked House Protected, and inside it went every copy Naomi had reviewed. The trust, the freeze order, the letter Julian promised to send confirming the estate's full compliance. I rewrote my emergency contact sheet and taped it to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. Naomi at the top. Julian next. I crossed out Malcolm's name. The next morning, I walked down to the community garden with a small cardboard box full of tools. Greg's spade, an extra pair of gloves, seed packets I never opened. I left them on the table under the bulletin board with a note. "Take what you need, Mrs. Maddox. Mrs. Jackson from 2 streets over stopped me on my way out." "Is everything all right with Malcolm?" she asked. "He seemed so involved lately." I smiled. Just enough to keep the question from settling too deep. "He's been busy," I said. She nodded and didn't ask again. At home, I poured myself tea and sat by the window. The house didn't feel lighter, but it felt mine again. I didn't need to fill the rooms with noise. The quiet was enough. Not a celebration, not a victory. Just stillness. I folded the receipts from the locksmith into a drawer and started a new list: groceries, winter coats, to donate finish painting the guest room. Before I went to bed, I walked the perimeter of the house, checking each lock. When I turned out the light, the silence stayed with me. A week passed. The light outside softened. The last of the leaves clung to the trees in brittle gold. I'd just finished sweeping the porch when I checked the mailbox and saw it a glossy white card with crisp blue lettering. Ben Halloway, Residential Real Estate. His number, his slogan, his grin. I didn't need to flip it over to know why it was there. I remembered the name. Malcolm had dropped it once casually, back when he still thought I was listening with both ears. Ben could get this place sold in 2 weeks flat, he'd said, like it was just a matter of logistics. I took the card inside, sat at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long moment. Then I turned it over and wrote in steady black ink, "Not for sale." No name, no explanation, just 3 words. I walked back out, taped it to the front door, and pressed the tape down hard. The air felt cleaner afterward, like something that didn't belong had finally been pushed back. Later that morning, I took my usual walk, past the library, across the park, along the maple-lined stretch where Mrs. Kelly still tended her roses like they were made of glass. At the corner cafe, the bartender from that night looked up as I passed. His apron was dusted with flower sleeves rolled. He didn't wave, just gave a quiet nod. The kind people share when they've seen something together they don't speak of. I nodded back. My steps were slower now. Not from age, from purpose. The house had been saved. The papers filed the lies exposed, but trust didn't get rebuilt like a fence. It didn't respond to fresh paint or careful repairs. It sat quiet like frost on a window pane. You didn't break it to pieces. You just learned to live around it. At the corner, I stopped for a moment and looked back toward my street. The wind shifted, and the taped card flapped once, then settled flat again. I kept walking.